Comics are far more complicated than most people give them credit for. It's not only illustrating, it's also writing. Comics are intimidating. I've always thought of them as a step to the left of animation, where rather than convey a visual story through illustrated movement, you convey a visual story through the illusion of movement. We've done a video on comics before, but this time we'll focus on pacing and illustrative style, as well as layout design with the help of TourBox Lite. I'm the kind of person who's pretty stuck in her ways, and a big thing attributed to artist speed is to have a workflow that we can do without thinking twice. The TourBox speeds up an artist's way of working with programmable shortcuts and a seamless experience without having to even glance down. This is a product for video editors, photographers, illustrators, all kinds of creators. They just released their newest and most affordable model in their line of TourBoxes, the TourBox Lite. I'm an artist who actually uses her buttons on her tablet, and I've been doing so for around a decade at this point, so I'm a little skeptical about how much faster this little thing could actually make me. But enough talking, let's actually get into the whole video and give the TourBox Lite a try. Comics are a lot more like videography and photography than people might think. I've gone over like different shot types before, but we're going to be going over specifically pacing, because the first thing when you're planning a comic is you want to think about the pacing of the comic itself. When we are illustrating a comic, biggest thing that we want to think about is we want to think of our comics as if they are a drawn movie, right? They are going to be a drawn movie. The natural action is essential to creating a comic, and how a character travels from point A to point B should be very, very clear, right? We want to think of our comics as if they are a drawn movie. If we do not have action that feels natural, then it is very, very difficult to follow what our characters are doing. Right? So the biggest example that I tend to give is the door example. Right? Let's go with example A here, right? It is a little bit harder to follow along. We have a person sitting in a chair, and then suddenly they're at the door, they open the door, and they're outside. Right? This is pretty hard to follow along because we don't actually see how they get to the door. Suddenly they're just at the door, right? Sit on the chair, boom, door. What's going on there? We don't know. So we need to add in some pacing to add back in that natural action. So first we have a person sitting at their chair. We see them get up from the chair and notice the door, right? They go to reach their hand for the doorknob, and then they push the door open, and then we get to see them walk outside. This is an easier flow of action because it shows enough movement to convey what is happening. It is a very show don't tell style of storytelling. We need to show enough in order for it to be clear enough for the person to know what's going on. So let's talk about that. If we put that into words, our average pacing, right? I call this our point A to point B way of working. We start with point A, then we move on to an inciting action, then our main action, and then point B. So let's go back to this chair example for a second here. If we have point A is our chair. This is where we start, right? This is where we start in the narrative that we are hoping to convey. Our inciting actions are the build up to the goal. So in this case, we have the person getting out of the chair and seeing the door. Getting out of the chair, seeing the door, and then I would also say grabbing the door handle. And then we have our main action. Our main action is the person opening the door. This is our final and main action in order to get to point B. And point B is where you end in these series of actions, right? In this case, it is the person ending up outside. In this case, if you notice here, we have our point A, and then it jumps straight to the main action in point B. There are no inciting actions in our first example here. So adding in the inciting actions is how we make sense of the movement that is going on. The more inciting actions that you add, the more tension that builds. If you're going to add more things before you get to the main action or before you get to the point B, the more of these that you add, the more tension that builds because it's taking longer to get to that final point. Let's say if I was working in a horror setting, I'm going to add way more inciting actions than this, right? Maybe we have this person sitting here and then maybe we have them notice a sound at the door, right? And they sit there and kind of stare at the door for a second. So maybe I have another panel of that. And then they slowly get up to the door, get up from their chair. And then we have another panel of them slowly walking towards the door. And then we have one panel of them reaching for the doorknob. And then we have them actually grabbing the doorknob. And then we have a panel of the door slowly opening. And then we have the door swinging open. And then outside to see nothing's there. If we add way more of those inciting actions in there, you can kind of visualize how much slower that's going to feel. And all that's doing is it is adding more tension. So the more inciting actions that you add, the more tension that builds to the scene that you are trying to create, right? I'm making this really in relativity to movement. This isn't necessarily necessarily what has to happen. I'm gonna give you a couple examples from a couple of sketched out comic pages I have. It's a really easy way to teach it for physical movement as well, but it can also work with dialogue. Right? It doesn't necessarily need to be in relation to movement. It can also be in terms of dialogue, right? So in this case, we have Corn, my son, right? We have him killing the spider, right? There's more action going on before this, obviously. So we have him starting out, you know, walks over, grabs the axe up off of the spider. He goes, hey, town's safe, everyone. He goes, is everybody okay? Don't worry, I'll carry out the bodies, right? So he's just talking. People are starting to notice that he's talking, right? We have 4 panels here of people slowly coming out of hiding. And then he goes, but let me know if you need anything else. He says that with a crowd of people sort of gathering around him. And then he has a panel of silence. Now, what this panel of silence is doing is it is adding just a smidge more tension, just a smidge more, in this case, a little bit more of a comedic effect, where it's silent. He's kind of expecting people, you know, to be like, oh, thank you so much for, like, you know, helping us with the spiders. You know, he's pausing just for a second to wait for the reaction. And then we get to the last panel where they're all shouting at him like, whoa, what are you doing, right? If we didn't have this panel here, let's say that I just got rid of this, right? Let's say I did that, right? Let me know if you need anything else. Jump straight to here. You feel how quick that is. It's much quicker than me adding in this next panel over here. The more inciting actions, the more pauses you give yourself, the more tension that builds. And tension isn't necessarily something that's like bad or something that's causing you to be like, you know, oh, I'm getting the heebie-jeebies. Tension is just a build in emotion, right? It is something building up to something. So in this case, right, it's like that dramatic effect that you get when somebody goes like, oh, it's like, and the winner is this person, or like they announce something, or like they're done something, and then there's silence from the crowd for a second, and then they all erupt into cheers, right? And it makes that impact way heavier, right? It's the same deal with this one. It says, let me know if you need anything else, pause for dramatic effect, and then we have them all break out into shouting and anger, right? It's a really, really easy way to add that kind of tension with dialogue as well. Panel placement and page composition is very important for readability and pacing, and it goes hand in hand with speech bubbles. Now, we'll go into speech bubbles in a little bit, but what we are going to be doing instead is I'm going to kind of go over a few different panel placements and stuff that you can do. A couple little tricks up my sleeve that I like to do personally to add tension or to change the feeling of certain things. In this one, right, we have 2 different examples of essentially the same narrative. We have 2 panels that are around the same size. One person sitting there and then they go, hi, right? This has less tension. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe you just don't want it to be super, super tense. Maybe you just want it to be kind of comedic, that kind of thing. But if we make this panel way, way bigger, feels super empty, and this person's just sitting here, the triple dot, and then they go, hi, right? And the super small one. This has far more tension than the first set of panels up here. This draws out the silence. This creates a more strategic pause, because maybe they're lying, maybe they're thinking about something, maybe they're embarrassed, etc., etc. And it slows down that pacing that we are so hoping to achieve. This next one over here is we have this sort of way where we can play with both bubbles and with our panels, right? Playing with our bubbles is also a really good way to force our viewers' eyes to go in a specific direction, right? With this one specifically, this one forces the viewer's eyes down slowly, right? It is one action, right? So there's one person, there's one illustration here, right? Where a person is reaching down into like a bag, looks like. And the speech bubbles start up here, and then we have it connecting to a speech bubble down here. What this does is, these 2 panels imply 2 separate actions, right? First, we're going to be looking at the person's face up here. We're going to be looking at them speaking, and then we're going to be looking at them rummaging through their purse, right? This causes an emotional shift or a tension build. Maybe we have the person up here, they're talking, and then down here, their hands are twiddling. I've done that before with a different comic that I did forever ago. I love doing that sort of thing. And this also highlights the action that is happening. So imagine in this case, it's a person and they're giving their little monologue, right? And they're reaching out into their bag for, let's say they're like, it's like, you forgot one thing, and they reach into their bag and they pull out whatever that last thing is, right? So maybe they have like it up here. This is like, you're right. It's like, I don't know that much, but you're forgetting one thing. And then you get to see them rummaging into their bag. And it's like, oh, what did they forget? Right? And it gives that sort of feeling of tension, and it's a slow movement from one panel to the other. It's a really, really fun way to make that happen. This one as well, drawing the viewer's eyes slower across 2 panels. So let's say that we have one person, they ask a question here, and then this person's like, what? Hold on. And then we have a bunch of bubbles going across right here, right? This is for quick responses and for emotional shifts, right? Let's say this person is like, they're going on like a mission or something. This person's like, so are we just gonna dive in? And this person's like, what, are you crazy? No, we have to prepare for this. You need to make sure that we have all the things necessary, right? So maybe this person asks a dumb question and this person snaps back and they're like, are you nuts, right? So having this bubble in their space is like they're immediately jumping at what they've said. Like, what, are you crazy? And then we can have the bubbles slowly trail back over to this person. So it's like we're imagining almost like a slow pan to the other person. Think of it as like, again, think of it as if you are a videographer. Think of it as if you are making a movie. We are starting over here and then a slow pan to this other person speaking. So remember that even though we can control our panel size and things like that to change the pacing, we can also control how our bubbles are placed on our panels, and that can really help build tension or change the emotions or change the feeling of whatever it is that we are hoping to achieve. I'm the type who needs to slowly get used to something before I can use it reliably, but being able to program it to my liking has really helped me get used to it fairly quickly. I have a pretty specific way of working, my most essential keys being Alt, Shift, Control, and Spacebar. All of those are programmed onto my tablet, along with zoom in and out, undo, and save. What's fun about the TourBox is that I can put all of those into one place and then some. I've also got a redo on this one, a brush size adjustment, and 2 different kinds of saves. So sometimes I want to save the working file, and other times I gotta save another version of the file. It feels pretty natural to work with, kind of like I've just smushed my tablet buttons and keyboard onto one little device. Also, hey, listen to this. Dude. So satisfying. It feels great physically as well. Like the buttons are smooth and don't feel cheaply made, which is a thing I tend to pay attention to. We have done a video on types of panel compositions previously, so I'm actually not going to repeat all of that over and over, but if you want to see a more extensive version of this section, please go check out the link in the description. You can see all the different explanations for all of those. But the main thing that I want to highlight, especially as me working on this this page in front of you right now, is you want to pick the different types of shot types that you have in a scene carefully, right? Most of the time we tend to default to, let's say, a medium shot, right? It's like, you know, halfway through the body and you get to see the person and they're talking, right? And that's fine, right? We can totally do that. But I also think that you should, you know, change up the camera angle, change up different things that are happening, right? Because defaulting to a medium shot constantly for dialogue can get really, really boring, right? If you just have the same 2 people just staring back and forth at each other, it's the same, like, shot of, like, their waist and up each time. The reader's not going to be too engaged, right? So, while I'm sketching, you can kind of see I, you know, started off with a couple close-ups to kind of highlight Corn's, like, little bit of confusion that's going on as he's going through this forest. And then you get a lovely insert shot. I love insert shots. That's one of my favorites. You get an insert shot of the hand sort of summoning this tiger, this spectral tiger. And then you get this is where you get the medium, almost full body shot of both Corn and the tiger. So the tiger gets introduced. And then another close-up shot / insert, because you get the insert of Corn's hand, but then you also get the close-up of the tiger to kind of highlight that she is the one sort of speaking. And then you get another medium shot of both Corn and the tiger, just to fill in that space. But, you know, the difference in angles, the difference in types of shots and whatnot really help the comic pages itself, the comic panels themselves, sort of stick out and feel a little bit more interesting. Like, think about, if you are doing this yourself, right, think about what you are hoping to achieve with this conversation, right? Is it more lighthearted? Is it more serious? Is it sadder, right? Maybe you want to show off emotions. Maybe someone's doing something else that you want to highlight, or like, maybe you want to show off something that someone's looking at farther off, so on and so forth, right? Let's do a hypothetical. Let's say that somebody is, like, you know, A really common one's like somebody says like, I promise I'll do something, and then you get a shot behind them of like their fingers crossed. And that's like a different thing that you can do, is you can highlight those fingers being crossed behind their back. Or like if you want to do, maybe somebody is like really, maybe they're really angry, and you want to highlight their like mouth changing from like maybe shock or something, and then they get really angry, so you want to show their teeth gritting, so you do a really close-in zoom of that, right? You can get really creative with your panels and your pacing and stuff like that, so you should really focus on doing something other than a medium shot. You should also make sure that you are never ignoring your 180 rule. Now, the 180 rule, right, is that they should always have the same left-right relationship no matter what. Let's say we have one character on the left. We have one character on the left, and then we have another character on the right, and they're having a conversation. If suddenly that left character is on the right side, and that right character is on the left side, it doesn't make any sense anymore, because you're like, wait, I thought this person was on the other side, right? So in this page with the 180 rule, right, Corn always stays on the left, the tiger is always on the right, right? Even in this one panel where we kind of get just the face of the tiger, we can sort of see where Corn's hand is positioned. They have not changed their positions whatsoever. We're just getting a slightly different angle of the tiger. If we had the tiger facing to the left, you're like, whoa, hang on, that's a little bit confusing, right? It's like, why is this tiger sort of, you could have them facing to the left, but it would be a little bit weird to track. So it makes a little bit more sense if, we keep them more rightmost by comparison to leftmost. So you make sure you want to very strategically put your characters in a composition. I'm a pretty simple person. Usually a lot of bells and whistles are my thing when working, but what I think the TourBox does best is those little quality of life things that you don't realize you were missing until they're presented to you. For me specifically, one thing that I really enjoy is, weirdly, the two different options for the kinds of zooms you can use. It's weird to highlight, I get it, but first off, getting to set this little knob to a zoom feels really cool to use, like a control panel on a spaceship or something. And second off, I can choose between having a precision zoom or the usual set zoom that Photoshop has. I used to do a lot more precision zooming when I was younger, but reaching over to the keyboard to swap to the magnifying glass tool started to get a little too slow, so I just stuck with the set zooms instead. However, getting that precision zoom back feels really great, and sticking it all in one spot with all my other hotkeys feels just as good. I didn't realize that one of the combinations that you can do on this thing is double clicks. You can actually set things to double click too, so actually I can fit my entire workflow on this thing. I could switch to the brush if I click this twice. Switch to a move tool, lasso, and then eraser as well. I set all of those ones because those are the ones that I tend to use most frequently. And you know what? Smooth sailing so far. Over time, this thing has become second nature. I'm not even thinking about where I'm clicking. If you get a TourBox Lite, you can download my exact presets. I'll include a link in the description below. And picking a style for longevity is something that can be really complicated for some people, because if you are an illustrator, if you're somebody like me, you are probably really used to go big or go home. You're probably really used to being oh, I want to make this piece look the best that it can all the time. I'm gonna pull out all these stops and gonna do as much shading as I can, do some color grading, do some adjustments, do some effects, stuff like that. In the long run, especially on a comic, you are going to be working on page after page after page after page after page, right? And if you decide to keep up that extreme illustrative style for all your pages, you are going to get worn out so fast, right? So especially if you plan to work on your own, working in a way that won't hurt you in the long run is incredibly important. For this comic specifically, this comic is really line work heavy. But very color light. I'm not really pulling out a ton of stops for the color. It's actually quite flat. It's a very flat way of working. There's no real heavy shadows I need to keep track of. Lighting, there's no effects placed on them. It's exclusively edge lighting. Just slight color adjustment where necessary, but most of the time I am working in flats. Even that background, it's they're all flats. And it's really not the toughest thing to work in. It cuts down my working time by a ton. If you're wondering, then it's like you look at like Marvel stuff or whatever, right? You're like, how come they're all like crazy, right? Most of the time, comics done in the Western industry are done by a team of artists, right? Colorists, line artists, layout artists, writers, etc., right? There are multiple people in this pipeline. If you are an artist on the comic, you are in a team, most likely, right? Even if you go through like a series, right? Even if there's like one story, there might even be a different line artist throughout the story, like a different like person who illustrates it, and then you have a different colorist each time, right? The person who line arts probably is not the same person who does the colors. Indie comics and a good chunk of manga are done by like one or two people, usually, right? You have an artist and an editor, a writer and an artist, etc., right? That's usually, it's usually one to two people more often than not. However, if you are working on your own, you need to find a way to make this workload lighter on yourself. And the easiest way to do that is to make the art style evergreen, right? My old comic that I did, Grayson, Grayson, I kept telling myself, I was like, yeah, this is like easy. This is like, you know, I'm like, there's no problem working this way. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna like add subsurface scattering to all these characters. Yeah, I'm gonna like shade and everything and make sure there's like complex lighting, and we're gonna have a short focal length, and we're gonna, you know, even though I got really quick with my style, over time, it still wore on me, right? There was still so much to do each time. And I was like, man, every time I was like, man, you know, there's so much left to do, and it would kill me. It was like, it's why I dropped it so quick after doing the rerun, because the initial pass, like, I had already done a full chapter, but then I went to that intensity and then some for the next pass, and I was like, man, this is too much. I got really burnt on working on it, and it, you know, it killed me over time. So I've learned from my mistakes for this one. A little bit easier way of working, I think, in this case. Experimentation is good, right? If you are testing out a style, testing out things, right? Test out various styles before committing to one that you can reliably do over and over and over, right? I did a couple of tests for this comic, and I had an initial style I was going for, and then it's really funny. At like page maybe 6, while I was lining it, I was like, I kind of want to switch how I line this. And my friends were like, don't you dare reline pages 1 to 5, or like, don't you dare switch this up now. But I did, because my friends, we did a little bit of scrutinizing on the earlier pages, like, you cannot tell the difference that easily. So I ended up switching up the line art style, but it's not so noticeable to the point where it's like terrible, you know. So this line art style is still, like, I'm still able to do this pretty quick, right? If you want the actual time that it took me to do the lines, it was like an hour. So it's like, it's not that bad. It's very, very quick. Testing out your style can also give you a chance to practice your comic language, like an art style for the comic itself, right? I don't work like this all the time. I don't work like this style all the time. I am an illustrator, so I have a much more in-depth style that I tend to work in. If I am being paid to do bigger pieces, or if I want to do a bigger piece, I have my own way of working. And it's not only just, like, the style, like the illustrated style, it could also be, like, the layouts that you like to use, colors that you use frequently, types of shots that tend to be done frequently, etc., right? I am a huge fan of close-up shots. I'm a huge fan of inserts. I'm a huge fan of having your character spill over panels. I love having them overlap panels. I love having them not stay within the box, right? I think that that's really, really fun. And, like, also, not having the bubbles always be on top is, like, you can see this one bubble is behind the two characters, and I think that's really fun. It sort of gives it a sense of space, a 3D space. And I think, like, if you have all these fun little things that you notice that you do, right, that aren't necessarily, like, within, like, the rule set, it's sort of a language that you come up with on your own, and I think that that's what really makes your comics feel more alive, is you sort of figuring out what you like to do and figuring out that style that you have with your own work. And that's what takes your comic from being like, yep, this is me following the rules, to, yep, this is my work. This is the way that I work, and this is the style that I am hoping to achieve. I'll be really honest, I wasn't just skeptical that TourBox would work, I didn't even think it would compare to the workflow I'd grown for myself over the years, but I can easily say that I was proven wrong this time. It actually didn't take very long to get the hang of, and I bet using it for an extended period of time would prove it to be even faster than what I'm used to. I'm really big into like nice feeling plastics, so I'm like, this plastic feels great. You know? I'm a little bougie, so I'm like, if the plastic that I am using does not feel nice, then I don't really want to use it. So I'm like, this plastic, not cheap, very nice. Not needing to reach my hand between both my keyboard and my tablet really assists with a seamless workflow. TourBox lets me put all of my essential functions all into one place, which gives me that efficient and speedy feeling that I enjoy so much. Little time savers like that can really make a huge difference in the long run, so it's cool that there's a really affordable product like the TourBox Lite that can help with that. Thank you so much, TourBox, for sponsoring this video. You can learn more about them, the TourBox Lite, and the other TourBox models that they offer through the link in the description.
Join a virtual class to learn live from our professional artists. Get creative assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork. Start today and level up your practice. If you learned something new, like and share this with a fellow art nerd. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.